5.3 Economic and Business Drivers of Net Operating Assets. History is not a catalogue, but a convincing version of events. A.J.P. Taylor. Just as my younger son enjoyed breaking things into bits to help him understand how things work, so we can break the accounts into bits, or in other words, analyse them, to help us understand what parts of the financial statements are causing certain changes to other parts of the financial statements of a firm. For example, in the case of Ryman Healthcare, we can see how certain changes in various elements of the sales of the firm have influenced and driven its growth in net operating assets, NOA. Yet we are not interested in what makes the financial statements work or tick. We are interested in what makes firms work or tick. We need to take the step to move from the accounting drivers to the economic and business drivers of a firm. We are interested in understanding the economic and business realities of a firm, because these are what we need to predict to form judgments about a firm's outlook or future. The better we understand the past economic and business drivers of a firm, the better chance we have of intelligently and sensibly predicting them. To do this, we will need information in addition to the financial statements of a firm. We will need to look at relevant economic and industry data, of which there can be a surprising amount available from a range of sources. For example, there are industry bodies in the retirement and healthcare industry, and a range of economic and industry statistics are available. We can compare the retirement and healthcare industry in New Zealand with that in Australia and in other countries such as the US and UK. We can make a range of inquiries about a firm. For example, we can mystery shop our firm. I happened to do this for Ryman Healthcare many years ago in 2007, when living in Wellington, New Zealand. Ryman Healthcare has 3 retirement villages in Wellington. In early 2007, one of these, Malvina Major Retirement Village, was undergoing a major extension and was selling occupation rights to 46 new units. Ryman Healthcare advertised an open day one weekend in March 2007. You needed to be 60 years of age or more, or be 55 years of age or more and married to someone 60 years age or more, to be able to be a resident in a retirement healthcare retirement village. I did not meet these criteria, so I asked my parents if they would accompany me on a mystery shopping outing to the Malvina Major Retirement Village open day and provide me with suitable cover. We turned up shortly after the 10 a.m. opening time for the opening day. My parents were 81 and 75 years of age at the time, in good health and living comfortably in a small house next door to my family, which was thoroughly renovated a few years ago. They had no interest in moving into a retirement village. However, my mother quickly adopted the mode of an enthusiastic potential purchaser, as did my father. The construction of only a few of the new units was completed, although the new community facilities, including a great home theatre, a large community area with a bar, as well as a gym and an indoor swimming pool, which I was told had only been filled with water the day before the open day, were largely completed. I was struck by the number of people at the open day so early in the day. Tours of about 10 people were being conducted every few minutes through a show unit, which was fully furnished, as well as to the swimming pool and gym. We were offered some well-presented finger food and orange juice or water in the community area before we met with a sales advisor who took my parents through the pricing of occupation rights. We were given floor plans of various units, as well as excellent brochures that set out clearly a lot of the key information. The Ryman brand name was prominent on all the material, although there were also quite a lot of references to the name of the retirement village, Malvina Major. The person who took our tour said she ran a Ryman Healthcare retirement village in Invercargill and was very pleased to have a trip to Wellington to show people through Malvina Major Retirement Village. She referred to the retirement village in Invercargill as my village, and that I was building 9 new units in my village at present. Even allowing for the sales situation we were in, she seemed genuinely positive about her job and working at Ryman Healthcare. Many people working for large organisations would refer to their village and that they are building new units. This person seemed to feel real ownership of and commitment to her village. The other staff conducting the open day also gave an impression of being positive about their jobs and satisfied with the value add and contribution they were making to their customers. I was also impressed with the high level of specification of the new extensions to the Malvina Major Retirement Village. The show unit we saw was well designed with a lot of attention to detail. The kitchens were well designed, and the quality of the bathroom, kitchen and general finish and level of specification of the unit were excellent. We were also told that about 27 or 28 of the 46 units in the new extension had already been sold prior to the open day. Many units on the various plans certainly had sold stickers on them. Ryman Healthcare appeared to be able to sell new units off the plan, and judging by the reaction of potential purchasers at the open day, it appeared it would have little difficulty selling the remaining new units at Malvina Major prior to their completion. The price of occupation rights to each of the units in 2007 was between about $300,000 and $400,000, with most about $320,000 to $350,000 each. Units with a harbour view were $20,000 more than the equivalent units without a harbour view, but which, it was pointed out, had afternoon sun, a valuable commodity in hilly Wellington. Units on higher levels were also more expensive than those on lower levels. Garages or undercover car spaces could be purchased separately, and we were told there was about 1 garage or car space for every 2 units. I was impressed by the apparent quality of construction. Given Ryman Healthcare retains ownership of the retirement villages and is responsible for their ongoing management and maintenance, it seems they have every incentive to ensure construction is carried out to a high standard in keeping with an owner-builder approach. I talked to a few prospective purchasers who attended the open day and could see they were genuinely impressed with what they saw. The sales pitch of the sales advisors was relatively low-key. The approach adopted was to get people's individual contact details on arrival to the open day. Prospective purchasers were then taken on a tour of the show unit and the community facilities. After the tour, prospective purchasers met with sales advisors who explained the cost of the occupation rights and the other expenses, and suggested the prospective purchasers think about it and then contact the sales advisor in a few days if they would like to discuss it in further detail and to consider specific units that were available for purchase. My parents received a follow-up mailing of further information and an invitation to have a free lunch at Malvina Major Retirement Village. There was certainly no hard sell. This approach was quite respectful of the elderly prospective purchasers and recognised the significant nature of the decision for them. It also indicated to me that they were having little difficulty selling occupation rights in the units, and were also focused on ensuring the occupation rights were not mis-sold and that they would have happy and satisfied ongoing residents. I suspected there was scope for Ryman Healthcare to continue to develop its marketing capabilities as sales and resales of occupation rights continue to grow. I also took the opportunity to walk through the rest of the Malvina Major Retirement Village with my parents. Although I'd driven past the retirement village on many occasions, it was only after walking through it that I realised just how big it was. It had been built in several stages over the past 8 years or so, and all was of a high standard of presentation. The names of residents were by the door of each unit, and based on the units we walked by, almost all were occupied by individual women, with a small number occupied by couples and very few occupied by individual men. I was impressed with the extent and quality of the various common areas, including an excellent dining room, which we saw functioning at lunchtime, which is when they serve the main meal for each day to those who use that service. A bowling green, billiard and games rooms, gyms, hairdresser, and so forth. Residents I spoke to were friendly and positive about our retirement village. I also spoke to some staff. I was impressed by staff at the reception desk at the main entrance, by nursing staff in the rest home, and by the general feel or impression I got about how the village was being managed and operated. The rest home was one of the best of its type I had seen. Everyone appeared to have an individual room and ensuite bathroom. The large atrium in the middle of the rest home was impressive and pleasant. Also, the extensive availability of emergency buttons in common areas and in units throughout the village, nursing staff will respond to these, underscores the support residents have available. It did occur to me that it would take nursing staff some time to get from the rest home and hospital at one end of the retirement village to residents at the other end, given the sheer size of the overall facility. I listened to the sales pitch of a sales advisor who spoke to my parents. This person made it clear to my parents that the weekly service charge was $79 per week. They would also need to pay for their own electricity in their unit, that there was a 4% deferred management fee capped after 5 years at 20%, and that Ryman Healthcare retained ownership of units and bore any capital gain or loss on these units. I was also impressed with a brochure Ryman Healthcare provided prospective purchasers on the terms of the occupation rights. There was a section entitled The Ryman Peace of Mind Guarantees, which was clear and specific. Mystery shopping is a way of gaining some insights into the customer experience a firm is providing and to better understand what is really going on with a firm's actual delivery of its value proposition to its customers. It is important to realise that my mystery shopping exercise only involved one retirement village and only one shopping experience at this village. It could be valuable to mystery shop a few villages, for example one in Auckland and one in Melbourne, to see how consistent or variable is the customer experience. We can also look at competitors' retirement villages, do an internet search on the industry players, existing and potential competitors, to research their activities and intentions, and if we have the budget, employ various industry experts to advise us. Sometimes a firm's CEO or other senior manager may have recently left and may be available to consult. There are many ways to kick the tires of businesses and engage with a firm's economic and business realities to help us understand what is really going on. The key to doing this well is to frame or direct our research into a firm's economic and business drivers based on our understanding of the key accounting drivers of a firm's economic profit or cash flow. This can help focus our analysis and protect us from an aimless fishing expedition and to wasting time and effort carefully analysing aspects of little importance while failing to focus on areas of critical importance. We need to use our initiative, common sense, imagination and networks to obtain relevant other information to help us connect a firm's accounting drivers to its economic and business drivers. We can see that some of the key economic and business drivers of Ryman Healthcare's net operating assets (NOA) in the past have been strong market demand for retirement villages, driven by increasing numbers of people 75 plus years in New Zealand and Australia, longer life expectancies, and the increasing proportion of this age group choosing to live in retirement villages. Ryman Healthcare's reputation, quality of service and effectiveness of its marketing, which have been important ingredients in its ability to achieve its sales and resales of occupation rights in retirement village units. Ryman Healthcare's capacity to acquire suitable sites and develop retirement villages using its own development and construction team. Regulatory environment. Ryman Healthcare receives a large proportion of its care fees from the government. Also, government has a strong interest in the aged care sector and, for example, continues to increase care subsidies for people in family homes. So there is some regulatory risk surrounding this aspect of Ryman Healthcare's revenue. Industry competition. An important factor to bear in mind when considering the actions of competitors is that most residents of retirement villages previously lived within a 10-kilometre radius of their retirement village. It is also difficult to identify and acquire suitable sites for retirement villages. There is an element of local monopoly with each of the retirement villages, not totally dissimilar to that enjoyed typically by many regional shopping centres. Once we move from examining accounting drivers to considering economic and business drivers of a firm, experience and ability to make sound commercial judgments becomes critical. The focus shifts from engaging with the firm's financial statements to engaging directly with the firm's economic and business realities. As each firm will be different, sources of information and how these assessments and judgments are made will vary considerably. However, there are a few general principles to bear in mind. These are to identify the key accounting drivers of a firm and to focus our examination on the economic and business realities of a firm that drive these key accounting drivers. We will be essentially seeking to connect the accounting drivers of the firm with its economic and business drivers. As we become more comfortable with our understanding of these linkages, we can make judgments about how these economic and business drivers might change in the future, and to quantify these changes in these factors into accounting numbers and into measures of value. Section 5.4. Forecasting net operating assets. Forecasting net operating assets, NOA, involves first forecasting the economic and business drivers of a firm's net operating assets. We can then estimate the effect of the future economic and business drivers of a firm on its future accounting drivers of net operating assets, and so forecast a firm's net operating assets. Restating financial statements and breaking the financial statements into bits to identify accounting drivers involves mainly technical skills that can be learnt largely from reading materials and attending classes and reinforced with practice. However, the connection of the accounting drivers of net operating assets with the economic and business realities driving them requires skill and insight, which can only be developed with experience and application. Indeed, forecasting the economic and business drivers of a firm is at the heart of financial statement analysis. In section 5.1, we discuss the issues involved in forecasting return on net operating assets, RNOA. Similar considerations apply in forecasting net operating assets, NOA. Our identification of the accounting drivers of net operating assets, NOA, for a firm helps to frame our assessment of the firm's economic and business realities. We focus on those aspects of reality that connect to the key accounting drivers of a firm's net operating assets. We are interested in those aspects of a firm's economic and business realities that will affect its sales and asset turnover, ATO. Usually, a key aspect we wish to examine is a firm's sales. We can analyse what has been driving a firm's sales in the past. However, what was driving a firm's sales in the past has little direct relevance to the value of a firm. We need to engage with and make judgments about how the economic and business drivers of a firm's sales and ATO, asset turnover, could be expected to change in the future. And we need to be able to convert these judgments into numbers, into the future accounting drivers of net operating assets, and then form a credible, convincing, and intelligent forecast of net operating assets. To forecast a firm's net operating assets, we will focus on expected future sales growth and the amount of net operating assets expected to support this sales growth, 1 over asset turnover. To do this, we need to understand what economic and business realities have been driving a firm's sales in the past and how we think these might change in the future. And we then need to convert these forecasts of the economic and business realities into accounting numbers. As we have seen in section 5.2, Ryman Healthcare has 3 main revenue streams: care fees, management fees, and fair value movement of investment properties. Care fees are largely subsidised by government and can potentially be affected by future changes in government policy. Except for an element of regulation risk, this revenue stream can be expected to be reasonably predictable and consistent. As a successful, established operator, Ryman Healthcare is also well placed to gain further new subsidies from government for new care beds and to continue to grow this revenue stream. Although Ryman Healthcare does not disclose its profit margin PM on its rest home and hospital care activities, we could safely assume its profit margin on these activities is substantially less than that achieved on its other revenue streams. However, the integrated nature of its retirement villages, providing residents with access to different levels of care when they need it, is a critical aspect of its total value proposition to customers. As we have set out in section 5.1, management fees are forecast to increase by 15% each year. They are driven by the past level of sales and resales of retirement village units. My forecast of management fees may prove to be slightly conservative. A key to forecasting the future fair value movement of investment properties is to examine the amount of current and projected development activity of Ryman Healthcare and the growth in residential property prices. The current level of development activity is substantial and on a scale not previously conducted by Ryman Healthcare. Ryman Healthcare has development sites to support its development activities for about 3 to 4 years, involving 19 retirement villages. Future growth depends on having a solid land bank at different stages of development: planning, design, consenting, and construction. There does not appear to be any major constraint on their development activities over the next few years, and the future supply of new integrated retirement village units can be expected to be greater than previously experienced by Ryman Healthcare. We could forecast strong supply of new retirement village units and aged care beds by Ryman Healthcare in the next few years. This will pose some challenges for Ryman Healthcare in its marketing and sales activities. With a substantial increase in supply, Ryman Healthcare would need to further increase its sales and marketing activities to ensure it is able to quickly sell completed units and aged care beds, and to ensure it maintains its high occupancy rates. Nevertheless, we can reasonably expect Ryman Healthcare will meet this challenge and that we will see substantial growth in the fair value movement of investment properties over the next few years. We could make various inquiries to help us ascertain the likely future demand for retirement village units. For example, we could engage an industry expert to prepare a market report for us on expectations for future demand in the retirement and healthcare industry to assess whether future demand is likely to be able to absorb the substantial increase in Ryman Healthcare's property development activity and of its competitors. A key economic and business driver of future demand for retirement village units will be an increasing proportion of people 75 plus in New Zealand and Australia wishing to live in retirement villages, which should substantially leverage the 3% growth rate in the population of 75 plus New Zealand and Australia to a much higher growth rate in demand. Underpinning this view would be the smaller proportion of this age group in New Zealand and Australia currently living in retirement villages compared to other countries such as in the UK and US. Also, the assessment of risks on future demand caused by events such as health scares or allegations of abuse of residents in retirement villages by staff would need to be considered. It would be hoped that Ryman Healthcare has a well-considered communication and PR plan to residents, relatives, staff, government authorities and media to handle such potential situations that may occur in Ryman Healthcare retirement villages, to limit the damage to its brand and reputation, and to future demand for its retirement village units and aged care beds. More importantly, Ryman Healthcare would need to ensure it has high calibre management in place in each of its retirement villages to ensure high and consistent overall standards in its retirement villages and prompt dealing with any individual problem staff. The swift and effective response by Ryman Healthcare to the coronavirus pandemic in both New Zealand and Melbourne has provided increased confidence in Ryman Healthcare's capacities to meet major health challenges such as a pandemic. Having considered all these factors, I think a forecast of 750 retirement village units is appropriate. Each year, Ryman Healthcare sells occupation rights to newly built retirement village units. It also resells occupation rights to older retirement village units that have become available because a previous resident no longer occupies the unit. For example, has either died or moved into care. On average, residents occupy the retirement village units for 7 years, which may be increasing slightly in recent years. Ryman Healthcare's resales of occupation rights and management fees are driven by the past level of sales and resales of occupation rights, as well as by growth in residential property values, with an average time lag of about 7 years. These have been growing strongly over the past 7 years. We could expect Ryman Healthcare to have quite spectacular growth in resales of occupation rights extending over the next 7 years, even without any future growth in residential property values. This would be based on the expected growth in the occupation rights of existing Ryman Healthcare retirement units that became available for resale each year, and the substantial growth in residential property values in recent years, and in the resale value of these occupation rights. These are solid, long-term growth prospects. This is a powerful aspect of Ryman Healthcare's business model that cannot fail to grab our attention. It is an important reason for the increasing level of consistency and predictability in Ryman Healthcare's cash flows and earnings. Another interesting aspect to consider is whether Ryman Healthcare may be able at some point to sell the ownership of its retirement villages to institutional investors. Securitising these assets to provide institutional investors with, say, commercial property yields could provide some substantial upside in the value of Ryman Healthcare's property assets, potentially in the order of $2 billion or $4 per share, compared to its existing book values based on valuations derived largely from residential property values. This has been a discussion of some of the issues we would need to consider when developing meaningful forecasts of the economic and business drivers of Ryman Healthcare's net operating assets, NOA. There is the potential for different people to make a wide range of different forecasts of these economic and business drivers. There is also substantial scope for there to be different levels of quality of analysis underpinning these forecasts. This could be due to some analysts more thoroughly researching some aspects of Ryman Healthcare's business, for example, Ryman Healthcare's property development program, or it could be due to some analysts forecasting their analysis more clearly on the key economic and business drivers of the accounting drivers of Ryman Healthcare's return on net operating assets, RNOA, and net operating assets, rather than spending energy analysing aspects of Ryman Healthcare's economic and business realities that have only minor or peripheral relevance to its return on net operating assets and net operating assets. We can differentiate ourselves from other people analysing a firm by the quality of our analysis and forecasts of a firm's economic and business drivers. Having considered a range of Ryman Healthcare's economic and business drivers, we might determine 5-year forecasts for Ryman Healthcare's accounting drivers of its net operating assets as set out in Table 5.8. Our forecast of each of Ryman Healthcare's revenue streams and of its total sales is based on the sales forecast assumptions set out in Table 5.1. Our forecast of asset turnover, ATO, is the same as the one we made of asset turnover set out in Table 5.2. From our forecasts of the accounting drivers of Ryman Healthcare's net operating assets, we can calculate our forecast of net operating assets for the next few years, which are set out in Table 5.9. We have forecast Ryman Healthcare's return on net operating assets, see Table 5.4 in Section 5.1, and net operating assets for the next 5 years. Along with a forecast of its cost of capital for operations, WACC, we could then forecast Ryman Healthcare's economic profit for the next 5 years. We will discuss issues about forecasting a firm's cost of capital in Chapter 7. At this stage, I have simply forecast Ryman Healthcare's weighted average cost of capital to be 8% for each of the next 5 years. We can forecast Ryman Healthcare's economic profit for the next 5 years, which are set out in Table 5.10. Table 5.10, forecast of Ryman Healthcare's economic profit 2023 to 2027. 2023 economic profit 294.4, 2024 310.4, 2025 358.2, 2026 331.0, 2027 364.5. Economic profit equals all in brackets return on net operating assets minus WACC, all times net operating assets. Note, years ending 31 March. Ryman Healthcare's economic profit in 2022 was $268.4 million, using return on net operating assets of 12.8%, net operating assets average of $5,565.8 million, and weighted average cost of capital of 8%. I am forecasting Ryman Healthcare's economic profit to increase in 2023 to $294.4 million, with economic profit increasing further in 2024 to $310.4 million and in 2025 to $358.2 million, then declining in 2026 to $331.0 million and increasing again in 2027 to $364.5 million. A key reason for my forecast of an increase in economic profit in 2023 is an increase in net operating assets, with my forecast of return on net operating assets declining marginally to 12.6% in 2023 compared to 12.8% in 2021. The subsequent increases in my forecast of economic profit are due to my forecast of continued growth in net operating assets, amplified by Ryman Healthcare's low asset turnover, which slightly decreases in 2023 and 2024. I also forecast a steady return on net operating assets of 12.4 to 12.8% in 2023 to 2025, with a slight decline to 12.2% in 2026 and 2027, as set out in Table 5.4 and in Section 5.1. Equity investors are entitled to the returns from a firm to eternity, or until the firm is liquidated or taken over. We cannot value Ryman Healthcare based on our forecast of economic profit or cash flow for the next 5 years. But we may not feel comfortable forecasting Ryman Healthcare's economic profit or cash flow beyond the next 5 years. As we delve further into the future, everything becomes less certain and less able to be predicted. We find ourselves coming up against our horizon, the limit to how far we can reasonably see or forecast into the future. This raises the issue of what we should do as we come up against our forecast horizon. Beyond our forecast horizon. As we project our imaginations into the future, it becomes increasingly difficult to see the way ahead. We might be reasonably confident about our forecasts for a firm for the next year, less confident for the following year, and so on as we step forward in our minds into potential future realities for a firm, stretching out into a time no one has yet lived. I live in Yeppoon, a town on the Capricorn Coast in central Queensland. We have beautiful views over the town, down the coast and across to the islands nearby. The skies are usually blue and clear. However, in winter, sometimes a fog settles in over Yeppoon and then slowly rolls out to sea. On these days, there are no distant views, just a fog closing in and restricting my world to a few hundred metres, in any direction. But then the fog will steadily lift and my world opens again to a wide perspective and distant views. Forecasting can be like this. Sometimes it can be most difficult to see very far ahead with any degree of confidence. It can feel like walking through thick clouds and fog in your poon. It can have its own feeling of mystery and wonder, but the world is a very uncertain place once you cast your eyes just a short distance away. At other times it can feel like having a clear view of a wonderful vista, able to see much further with considerable clarity and confidence. Whether we have a high or low degree of confidence in our projections, whether we feel confident to project many years into the future or just a few, we will still face a common problem. It is called the horizon. Regardless of how far or near the horizon is, it will always be there. There will be a limit to how far we can see with some degree of confidence. Even with a clear vista down the coast, we will not be able to see beyond the distant points and hills of the coast. It is the same with forecasting. There will always be a limit to how far into the future we feel comfortable projecting. A limit to how far forward we can see. Whether this is a few or many years, our projections will only be for a limited period into the future. Yet equity investors are entitled to returns from a firm to eternity, or until the firm is liquidated or taken over. How do we engage with or understand what might happen to a firm beyond our forecast horizon, beyond the limits of our ability to forecast a firm's future? We'll look at ways to handle this issue in Chapter 7. However, before we start thinking about what may lie beyond our horizon, we still have a few things to consider about how to forecast into the future before we hit our horizons. We still need to consider the substantial benefits of focusing our analysis of a firm on its operations, on the enterprise of a firm, not on its equity. Conclusion. When analysing a firm's financial statements, we need to focus on the future, not the past. Although understanding the past is important as a starting point to being able to predict the future, it has no direct relevance to the value of a firm. As we move into the realm of predicting or forecasting how aspects of a firm's economic and business realities might change in the future, we move away from dealing with events that have occurred and which we can know about with varying degrees of confidence, depending on the reliability of our sources of information. When we move from the past to predicting the future, we move into the realm of speculation or guesswork about how these events in the past might change in the future, which are things we cannot know because of the simple fact they have not happened yet. Indeed, it is likely our forecast of the future will never happen in exactly the way we expect. Tomorrow will always hold some surprises. Most of us get into trouble investing or allocating capital when we confuse what we can know about the past with speculation or guesswork. It is critical we keep the two clearly separated in our minds. Using an economic profit framework, we are interested in predicting the future expected economic profit or abnormal operating income of a firm. This requires us to predict return on net operating assets, RNOA, the required rate of return on operations, WACC, and the book value of net operating assets, NOA. This chapter has looked at forecasting two of these three drivers of economic profit: RNOA, return on net operating assets, and NOA, net operating assets. The issues with estimating and forecasting the required rate of return on operations, WACC, will be dealt with in Chapter 7. In this chapter, we have forecast Ryman Healthcare's return on net operating assets and net operating assets. We saw the key economic and business realities driving a firm's return on net operating assets, which we need to forecast are those that drive its profitability, profit margin, PM, and efficiency, asset turnover. We also saw that the economic and business realities driving a firm's sales are usually key aspects to forecast when forecasting a firm's net operating assets, along with those that drive its asset turnover. We also gained a sense in this chapter that we can analyse a firm by breaking it into bits, but that each of these bits are still related to and influence each other. We need to ensure we also look at the business overall and focus on how each of these bits relate to and influence each other. You will also note that our forecasts of the economic and business drivers of a business are for a few years, for a finite period. Yet an equity interest in a firm entitles the equity investor to dividends from a firm for eternity, or at least until it is liquidated or taken over. We will look at ways to handle this issue in Chapter 7. We will see we need to calculate a continuing value at the end of our projections or forecast period, based on some simplifying assumptions about what may lie beyond our forecast horizon. Before we do that, we will consider how we can simplify our analysis by focusing on the enterprise rather than on a firm's equity. We will see how we can focus on a firm's operations rather than also considering how it has financed those operations when valuing a firm. We will ask ourselves whether we can safely disregard the financial activities of a firm and focus our efforts on an analysis of a firm's operations, which may be more likely to influence value to equity investors. This is the question we'll consider in the next chapter.